Hello and welcome to Technophile.de. My name is Klaus and I'm showing you the Mobistel or Elson Cynus T1 today. That's a dual-core, dual-SIM smartphone, 1 GHz CPU speed, half a gigabyte of RAM, 4 GB storage, a 4.3-inch screen, and the typical basically specifications that you see with a few of these China phones, especially the Alcatel One Touch 997D Ultra, which I've tested recently. I'm curious to see how this compares to the Alcatel, but first of all, let's unpack it. Or actually, as this cover removes a bit tricky from the box, I've done that for you already. Here we go. We see the phone as you will find it when you unpack the phone for the first time. It is, well, mostly, it is in a small bag here. There is a protective sheet on it, which I removed already for the German unboxing, and I already put the battery inside. There's a 1800 milliampere battery inside. And as you can see, one of the bigger differences to the Alcatel phone is the backside, which is shiny, glossy, and has a strange kind of pattern on here. I must say, at the first sight I said, wow, that looks interesting, it's something new, but I'm getting tired of that very quickly, so, well, it's a matter of taste. If you like that more, I prefer the less shiny and more rubbery feel of the Alcatel. But let's have a look around the phone first before going into the comparison too much. 8 megapixel camera, 2 LEDs, slight Mobistel logo here that might be different in international versions. In Germany it's sold as a Mobistel Cynus T1. I think internationally it's just Elson Cynus T1. It's the same company, just a different brand name it seems. Let's have a look at the right side of the phone. That's actually an interesting one. There's the power button. That's nothing too special, but here there's actually a camera button, a dedicated camera shutter button, and it also starts the camera when you keep it pressed for a while. That's a nice feature that you don't see often on Android smartphones these days. On the upper side we have the micro USB connector, which is a bit weird, similar to my Huawei S&P1. The only two phones I have seen so far that have it on top. Not the most practical solution. I prefer it down here. And here it's on this phone it's actually clean. There's nothing besides the little hole for the microphone. Okay, let's go back to the upper side. Micro USB, and next to it the 3.5 millimeters headphone jack or headset jack. By the way, that is actually a Nokia or Sony compatible headset connector. So the headset that comes with it works with Nokia phones, for example, or Sony, older Sony Ericsson, for example. But the Samsung headsets, or also the one from the Alcatel, do not really work here. Interesting thing. Here's the volume rocker on the left-hand side. So if you look from the front, that's the left-hand side. Here I have the volume rocker, and that's it so far. The front is really actually very taken back, so to say. I would say completely black. There is only the speaker grill up here. You see the camera hole. Then you can slightly see the buttons here. You have actually 4 buttons as we used to have in older versions of Android. But let's wait until they're lit up, then I can explain them better. On the sides we have this chrome look, of course everything plastic, and then this shiny backside as I showed already. Well, let's switch that thing on for a while. We've got ice cream sandwich 4.0.4 on here, so a rather up-to-date version. Of course we are at 4.2 already, but well, who delivers phones with that new version already? I have already changed the wallpaper to see the performance of the phone, and so far with a few widgets and this animated wallpaper, it still is really fluent. So the first impression is nice. You see that the icons have been changed as well. They're different from the Android standard. They're also different from the Alcatel one. So some people invest a lot of time in redesigning those icons. I don't really know why, but obviously corporate differentiation is so important that companies are willing to invest in that. We see the app drawer here, also very fluid animations. Similar to the Alcatel, this is a positive surprise that all of these, both of these phones really have enough power. You don't really need much more for normal usage. One thing that I actually find quite annoying is the sensor buttons that are below the display. I think I mentioned that before. It's actually a positive aspect that there are extra buttons. The Alcatel 997D has on-screen buttons, which I think is mainly just a waste of screen real estate. But the buttons as they are implemented here have one big disadvantage. They're actually only illuminated when you use them, when you touch a button, and then for a short while they're illuminated, and right now you can see they're off again. Now the camera is out of focus, sorry for that. So basically whatever I do on the touch screen or start apps or whatever, they stay dark and you can't really see them. So you always have to use a button before you actually can see what the buttons are. That's quite annoying. The first press is always blind. Now when they're on, that's okay. So we have a home button here, menu button with a kind of an untypical symbol for Android, the typical back button, and the these days not very common search button down here. So that's a little disadvantage. So far about software. Software. One positive aspect here is that there is actually very few apps pre-installed. I have installed myself a few apps like Angry Birds, Star Wars, and actually a flashlight. There is not even a flashlight app here pre-installed. Looking at the Alcatel one, which has a huge set of permissions, this is not the worst idea. I prefer to choose one myself from the market. Besides that, there's basically nothing that is really out of the normal area of apps on a Android phone. There is an FM radio, there is a music app which is slightly enhanced, Google Play Music, but all the rest is typical. So the Total Command is something I installed myself, of course. One thing that is not applicable here for English-speaking people, but in German, some of the app names are really strangely translated, like search, and the FM radio is called FM transmitter, which sounds as if you have an FM transmitter that could send signals to your car radio, for example. That's not the case here. It's just the normal radio app. So far about the Mobistel Cynus T1 or Elson Cynus T1. Let's have a quick comparison with the Alcatel, which I mentioned quite a few times before in this video. Here we are. Let's put them next together and show one of the big differences that these phones have. This becomes very obvious here now. Well, not the screen brightness, that's just configured differently. What do I do here? Let's switch this into the brightest mode as well. One obvious difference is that the Alcatel uses a part of the screen for the buttons, while, as I already mentioned, the Mobistel or the Cynus T1 has an extra set of buttons that leaves more space on the screen. You can actually see that here in the app drawer you have a full row additionally of app icons. You see they are squeezed a little bit in compared to the ones on the Alcatel, but still it's you have more things you can see at one side. And the same thing, of course, also happens for web browsing. Any other app has there's just a bit more space left on the screen. So that's a positive thing. Let's compare the screens a little bit. They're both now in the brightest mode. And let's see if I can, well, it's a bit slippery. If you can see the viewing angles, and I must say that the Alcatel at least does not have a big disadvantage against the Mobistel. I actually have the feeling that the Mobistel, the Cynus T1, shows a little bit more variations. Well, it's kind of hard to see. It's difficult doing that the same with two smartphones, but there's not a huge difference in here. My first impression is that the Alcatel is maybe even a bit better, even though it doesn't sport an IPS screen. At least Alcatel doesn't say so. They are both. It's quite okay displays for the price area. There are better displays. I personally love AMOLED displays, but they're both really good. Definitely not a big disadvantage you have here on those two. What else in the comparison? Let's have a quick look at the optics. They're both not the thinnest phones. The Alcatel has a slightly less shiny look, and especially on the back it's this kind of rubbery backside here, while the T1 is a very shiny, funky looking thing. Interestingly, both phones, as I said, are about as the same thickness, but the Alcatel is a bit thicker on the bottom, which is maybe due to this part of the back cover here, while the Mobistel is a bit thicker on the top part, maybe because of the camera protruding it a little bit. One other thing that I already realized, you probably saw my review of the Alcatel, where I mentioned that the camera, oops, what I'm doing here, that the flashlight of the camera has a very strange looking tint, yellowish, dirty looking. This is not really nice. This is not happening with the Cynus T1. It is actually also not perfectly illuminated. Maybe we can just try that. Where do I have the camera here? Yep. Maybe we can see if I just take a quick snapshot of the table. Okay, that was with no flash. It's deactivated right now. Again. Well, now that's tricky here because the table is reflecting, so I cannot say a lot. But I tried taking a picture of a white wall, and I don't have these ugly stains as the Alcatel has, but it's not perfectly equally illuminated, so I think the lower left corner was a little bit darker, but that's okay. It works much better, I think, for pictures. I've taken test pictures so far, but not really compared them in detail yet. It seems that the Cynus T1 camera is maybe a bit better than the Alcatel one. At least they're more or less on one level. There's probably just details. You probably remember the Alcatel has a slightly grainy, like highly compressed look to the pictures, so if you zoom into them and do some pixel peeping, then you will see that. But both are okay if you just want to take a picture that you see on your computer monitor or here on the display, and don't zoom into them too much. They're completely fine. So my resume so far from what I saw of the Mobistel, it's a fine phone for a price of below 180 euros, currently even for 170 euros in one drugstore chain in Germany. This is really a lot of power, a lot of smartphone that you get. So the price value ratio is excellent here, and there's only few phones that can compete with them. One of them, of course, is the Alcatel. It's a few euros more expensive right now in Germany, and it's about the same technical data, so and performs well. And then there is the Huawei Ascend G330, which has also very similar specs. Is a little bit smaller, 4-inch screen. And looks very interesting. Maybe I'll also do a test of that later on. And then there's the Panasonic Eluga, which is actually a higher class telephone but has dropped in price so much. It obviously doesn't sell very well because it has a very weak battery and also non-extensible memory of just 8 GB. But the rest of that phone is actually really fine, with a nice AMOLED screen, a very thin case, and very nice design. So yeah, here we are. That's just very few phones that can actually compete. If you go into dual SIM, if you want to combine your work telephone and the private one into one and use 2 SIM cards, then there's basically just the Mobistel or Elson T1. There is its bigger brother T2, which is basically just a bigger version of that one, 5-inch screen, huge, but the same resolution. I'm curious to see how that works out, how that feels. But the same specs, just a different camera and a little bit stronger battery. And then there's definitely the Alcatel. There are more phones from China coming with the same chipset. That's the MediaTek MTK 6577. So there is Zoppo and Hero and other brands, but they're not as much available, at least here in Germany, and I think throughout Europe they're still very exotic. So I think these two, and maybe plus the G330 of Huawei, are unique in its class for the value that they offer for the price. Definitely below 200 euros here in Germany, significantly below that, and still a very fluent performance. I'm tempted to say you don't really need much more of an Android phone than this one here. Of course, having a bigger screen, higher resolution, and more memory and things like that is nice, and having a quad-core CPU surely feels good and gives some contingency for the future. But so far, I think these are really phones that you can deal with very well. If you're just about to do a job with them, then you don't need much more, or put the other way, anything else is luxury. So stay tuned for my full review, which I hope to produce in about a week, maybe 2 weeks. Yeah, for me it's important to use a phone at least 1 full week in daily environment and use it every day as a normal phone. So I don't want to create a review in just a few days, even if you're maybe waiting for that. Well, stay tuned, subscribe to my channel, and hope to see you soon in the next video. My name is Klaus from technophile.de. Bye bye.